John Locke's ideas make no sense. Hey, nerds. So, I'm going to talk more about an excerpt from this book I have that is a collection of essays from the English philosophers from Bacon to Mill, including, of course, like John Stuart Mill's On Liberty, very famous essay, uh, Bacon, Mill, it's Hobbes's Leviathan, etc. And last time I was talking about John Locke's essay, Enquiry Concerning Human Understanding. So John Locke, remember, he's a 17th century, like, seminal Enlightenment figure in British liberal empiricism, basically, and like a classical liberal in every sense of the word. And he was also a British monarchist, and he was a doctor at the time, and he was also, like I said, a seminal figure in empiricism, which there are many different versions of empiricism, but to him, his empiricism is, this is sort of an oversimplification, but he believed that the mind is a blank slate when you're born, and then we learn all information about the world through sense perceptions, which to me, like, and to many people, seems like obviously inaccurate on the face of it. That's kind of a dumb way to look at the world. Although, as is usually the case with philosophers, even though I disagree with his conclusion, his argument is very sophisticated. But seeing the reasons behind his argument shows you how, like, sophisticated his rationalizations are, because he's an intelligent philosopher, which often happens with philosophers. So he gets into this justification. So let's get into this here. Of simple ideas and sense. Division of simple oh wait, first I should explain. So I mentioned before, in understanding, inquiry concerning human understanding. By understanding, he basically means knowledge, like gaining knowledge about the world, which is epistemology, or, like, to oversimplify, the philosophy of knowledge, or how we knows things. So he thinks we know we learn about the world, and we gain knowledge through sense perception. That's what he means by understanding, basically. Not by understanding, he essentially means knowledge. Okay, so the division of simple ideas. The better to conceive the ideas we receive from sensation, it may not be amiss for us to consider them in reference to the different ways whereby they make their approaches to our minds and make themselves perceivable to us. So this right off the bat is obviously suspect. Like, it begs the obvious question: how do we learn ideas through sense perception? Like, we taste, touch, smell, hear, or see an idea? I don't think that's how ideas work. There aren't these metaphysical things called ideas that float around in the world and then pop into our heads magically. That's why, like, I don't think to me, there isn't a good option to choose in terms of consciousness. The main ones, of course, are dualism, like the mind and body are separate, and then there's materialism. The mind and body are the same thing, but everything is material, can be proved scientifically. And then there's compatibilism, which is kind of like meshing the two, but to me, it's kind of like a cop out and changing like Robert Wright says, changing the definition of consciousness, basically, to accommodate for whether we have free will in our consciousness or not. But anyway, there are, like, it's many of countless philosophers have pointed out that it's clearly not the case that there are these ideas magically circulating in the world and they pop into our heads. I mean, it's possible, because I'm not 100% a scientific materialist, but I'd say that's extremely unlikely. So this is how he justifies his argument, though. So he's justifying his argument that we gain understanding about the world, and we learn knowledge, and we come to know things through sense perception. We learn ideas through sense perception. Okay, so then he continues. First, then, there are some ideas which come into our minds by one sense only. So think about that. That doesn't make sense. You touch something and you have, oh, I have an idea. Maybe you have an idea of touch, but you can't, like, it's not like I touch my leg and then I learn how my leg works, or I touch Neo on the Matrix poster and it's like I've seen the movie or something like that. And it's not like I can see an idea and understand it, or taste an idea, or smell an idea, or hear an idea. You can hear someone talking about an idea, but that doesn't mean you're learning about the idea through hearing it. You're learn I mean, it doesn't mean you're gaining knowledge from hearing it. It means you're hearing someone talking about the idea, and through the words, you are learning about the idea. You're not learning the fully formed idea through hearing it. You're not learning a fully formed idea through any of your sense perceptions, I don't think. Okay, so then he continues. Secondly, there are others, he means ideas, others, other ideas that convey themselves into the mind by more senses than one. Thirdly, others that are had from reflection only. We gain knowledge about ideas from reflection. You could argue that that's the case, but reflection is certainly not the same at all as sense perception. Reflection just happens inside your head. It doesn't necessarily have anything at all to do with sense perception. Okay, he continues. Fourthly, there's some that make some ideas again. There's some ideas that make themselves way and are suggested by the mind by all the ways of sensation and reflection. We shall consider them apart under these several heads. So he doesn't actually get into all of them in detail here, but he does in the rest of his longer Concerning Human Understanding essay. But anyway, so he's basically like forming a hierarchy of the complexity of ideas. Simple ideas are, we learn about simple ideas from one sense only. We learn about slightly more complex ideas through more senses than one. And then there are some ideas that are so sophisticated that we learn about them through all the senses and reflection. So you could argue that senses can contribute to reflection in terms of gaining knowledge about the world. But that doesn't mean that we can gain knowledge about the world from sensation only. That's what empiricism is specifically to John Locke. So we can't gain knowledge about the world from sense perception specifically. We can from reflection, but reflection is obviously not the same at all as sense perception. So he does, like, to me, he makes some really, like, today in today's world, like, pseudoscientific explanations. But again, this was his primitive science in the 17th century, so it may have sounded more scientific. But again, if you're trying to scientifically determine what consciousness is in a materialistic way, you're undoubtedly going to be relying on outdated biology, which shows it here, because he's rationalizing with pseudoscientific biology by today's standards, which is effectively what he is doing. So he doesn't prove his argument because he's relying on inaccurate biology, which is no fault of his own, but it proves him wrong. So his argument is pseudoscientific biology, but I'll get into it here. Um, yeah, well, okay, so I'll just start here. Thus, light and colors as white, red, yellow, blue, and other colors, he continues, come in only by the eyes. All kinds of noises, sounds, and tones only by the ears. The several tastes and smells by the nose and palate. Well, that makes sense. That's how you define the different senses. And if these organs are the nerves, which are the conduits to convey them from without to their audience in the brain, the mind's presence room. So, it relates to his conception that we have these ideas floating around in our heads or floating around in the world, and then they come into our heads. Um, as I may so call it, the mind's presence room, and the ideas are any of them so disordered as not, oh, sorry, the biological functions, let's say, are so disordered as to not perform their functions. They have no postern to be admitted by, no other way to bring themselves into view and be received by understanding. So we cannot, basically saying, we cannot possibly gain knowledge in we cannot possibly gain knowledge without our biological mechanistic workings of the way our sense perceptions occur. So basically, I don't. I'm. This title is obviously somewhat of a pun or a play on words. I'm not saying John Locke in general, his entire philosophy makes no sense. I'm saying his ideas on sense make no sense. So yes, John Locke is using pseudoscientific biology, which is vastly inaccurate by today's standards, to prop up his inaccurate opinion that we only gain knowledge about the world through sense perception. And this is why John Locke's ideas about sense make no sense.